Hello. It is Halloween, the spookiest of all days, and I'm going to hang out with people and watch some spooky movies. But before I leave, I'm going to shoot this, and I don't know how I've got another video I've already shot that I need to edit before I'm going to edit this one. But hopefully, I'll get all of this out soon. It's the X tag. We're so close to the end. Thanks to Jim, as always. Jim's Books, Reading, and Stuff. For doing these. Let's jump right in. X is for xylophone. What is your ringtone? So I have not had my phone set to make noise in years. Years and years and years and years. Um, since I started using smartphones, which was I was a very late adopter to the smartphone. I got my first smartphone in early 2016, so almost 6 years ago. So I don't even know because it doesn't make noise. It's whatever the default setting is. Let's find out. Let's explore. Because I don't have it set to make noise, so I never hear it. It's called Festival. Make noise. Do it. There you go. When I did have my phone make noise, when I was in college, mostly, for a long time, for like 5 years, my ringtone was "Kiss from a Rose" by Seal, which I had a pretty intense love affair with that song for a number of years, um, for some odd reason. Um, yeah, and so it my ringtone was like right where he starts singing in the first verse. There used to be a great tower. From there up through the chorus, um, if I let it ring that long, I guess. Because I always loved that more than the chorus. I love that first verse. Um, yeah. X is for X Files. Are you a Mulder or a Scully? I kind of split the difference. Though maybe I lean a little more Scully than Mulder. I feel like I'm more open to the possibility of aliens and conspiracies and things than Scully is, but I'm not a believer. I don't have any sort of blind faith in the subject. I'm very interested and fascinated by the subjects, but yeah, like, I think that, like, in a probability scale, like, the universe is just so massive that, like, alien life has to exist, certainly. Um, but whether that doesn't mean that they're making contact with humanity. I feel like that is a, you know remote possibility. But we have had interesting updates with, like, the Pentagon declassifying all of that information in the last couple of years that basically verified the existence of UAPs as a legitimate thing that is real, that exists, that the government admitted exists. That doesn't mean that they're aliens, you know, but there is something going on that we don't understand, which is interesting. X is for Xenomorph. Who or what is your favorite alien? Um, so I've got a couple. The Xenomorph is one for sure. I love that. I love Giger, H.R. Giger's art, and his design of the Xenomorph is amazing. Alien is one of my favorite movies. Um, some other ones that I really love are whatever you want to call the alien presence in the Southern Reach trilogy, by Jeff Vandermeer. Um, you know, in the movie, I believe they call it something like the presence or something, and it takes, like, a more physical manifestation form in the movie, which is cool, but that's not what happens in the book, if you haven't read the book. In the book, it's a lot weirder and more inexplicable and metaphysical, which I'm all about, you know. There's like some body horror stuff, and it's just like I love that conception of an alien, because it's truly like it is alien in the sense that it is so fundamentally biologically different than humanity that we like cannot grasp it. We cannot conceptualize it. And it feels the same way about us, and that sort of conflict as we try to understand each other is sort of I think the crux of what the drama of the Southern Reach trilogy is about, which is really, really interesting and part of why I love those books so much. X is for Malcolm X. Have you read the autobiography of Malcolm X by Alex Haley? I have. I read it when I was a teenager. Malcolm X is a pretty sweet dude, I have to say. I quite admire him. And, he wasn't a perfect man by any stretch of the imagination, but he was very important, and I think that his sort of vision and uncompromising nature appeals to me a lot more than someone like Martin Luther King. Not to disparage Martin Luther King by any stretch of the imagination, but just, I don't know. You could argue that maybe like Malcolm X represented something more of a black supremacy or something like that, but I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think it's more just that like he was in the way that he thought so much more hypercritical and wanted to really burrow deep into these issues in like a really interesting way, like what Jim talked about in the original tag video, where he was talking about like how we use language and how we use white and black and light and dark and the connotations that those words have. An example that he didn't use but I thought of when he was talking about it is in hacking. You've got white, black, and gray hat hackers. White hat hackers are like legal hackers who don't break the law. Black hat hackers are criminal hackers, and gray hats are like the people who kind of toe the line. And what do we do for thousands of years? We've encoded language to mean that black is bad, right? And why do we do that? And what does it mean when we have black people, right? So I think that the autobiography of Malcolm X is an incredibly important book that most everybody should probably have to read. I also really admire someone who feels purposeful enough in their actions to face a crossroads where they know that if they continue doing what they are doing, they are going to die, and they choose to continue to do so anyways. That is a type of strength that I do not think I possess, and I admire greatly. X is for Xmas. What is your favorite Xmas book? I can't think of any, other than Christmas Carol, any book that is just set in Christmas time. There are, of course, some pretty memorable Christmas scenes. The Harry Potter books have a number of memorable Christmas scenes in them. In Christmas movies, that's kind of more my wheelhouse, I think. Some of my favorite Christmas movies would be maybe, Die Hard's an obvious one. Fanny and Alexander, the Ingmar Bergman film from the 80s. That's not exclusively during Christmas, but it's sort of broken into two halves, and the first half takes place on Christmas Day. I do need to rewatch Eyes Wide Shut, which is a Christmas film. And I do like a few more traditional Christmas movies. Nightmare Before Christmas is a pretty lovely movie. You know, there's a few that are like kind of saccharine and whatever, but I don't mind them. You know, something like It's a Wonderful Life or Elf or Muppets Christmas Carol, maybe. They're fine. You know, I'll watch them. The Charlie Brown Christmas special, that does hold a very special place in my heart. Yeah. So Christmas books, I don't even know what are Christmas books. Are there, other than like children's books? I couldn't tell you a single one. X is for X-Ray Spex, classic punk band. Who is your favorite punk band? This is a really loaded question. It's tough because the question is band, not albums. You know, because if I was gonna say what's my favorite punk album, it's probably Double Nickels on the Dime by the Minutemen, which is a fantastic album. One of my favorites. Of maybe my favorite album of the '80s, in its entirety. Up there, if not at the top. But if I'm thinking about a full discography of a band, a few spring to mind. Minutemen is still up there for sure. Husker Du is also high up there. The Clash is definitely going to be high up there. Though they did, you know, have that last album, didn't they? And Black Flag would be up there. It's tough. Wire would be high on that list. Per Ubu would be high on that list. You know, it's part of the problem there is like, how do you distinguish punk from post-punk, right? So a lot of people want to call Wire post-punk. I want to call Per Ubu post-punk, even though, like, you know, Pink Flag came out in what, 78, and Modern Dance by Per Ubu was 77 or 78. It's like, you know, it's like the same year that the first Clash record came out, so it's like it's hard to call it post-punk when it was happening at the same time, right? I don't know. It just doesn't sound like punk, right? It doesn't sound like the Ramones, so they don't want to call it punk. But if the Clash is punk, then, you know, whatever. But out of the big, like, you know, people usually it'll be like Clash, Ramones, Sex Pistols, like that's the big three, right? And I think the Clash are significantly better than the Sex Pistols or the Ramones. The Ramones are probably the most important and influential because they sort of paved the way for bands like the Clash and the Sex Pistols, who were like working in direct response to hearing the Ramones. But just in the quality of the music, I don't think that either of them hold a light to the high highs that the Clash attained, you know. Clash are a very good band. X is for Xenocide. Is there a book you have read which covered a Xenocide? Obviously, there's the book Xenocide by Orson Scott Card, famed piece of shit, which I read when I was a child. I read the first 3 Ender books when I was a teen, like 12, 13. The only other thing I can think of that's about it is I haven't read the book Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers, which was famously made into a film in 1997 by one of my favorite filmmakers, Paul Verhoeven. And it's not explicitly like maybe Xenocide in the sense that like they do kill all of them, but it's clear that that's the intention, right? You know, the kill them all is like the rallying cry of the humans. The only good bug is a dead bug, right? And you know, the way that Orson Scott Card kind of deals with this this moral quandary as he has Ender do this really terrible thing, right? And then he spends at least the 2 books that I read, and God knows how long after that, just sort of like feeling really bad about himself because of what he did, and sort of, wallowing and blah blah blah. And like, I do like things like that sometimes, but I kind of really prefer the way Verhoeven tells it, where it's just this really biting satire of like showing you what you look like when you are of that mind, Just a movie that is about the allure of fascism and why people flock to it, right? Why it appeals to people in the first place, which I think is a lot more interesting. X is for the X certificate, which, as Jim explained, is a now out of date rating system in the United Kingdom, and it was also it is now an out of date film rating in America as well. So what was the first adult film you saw? I'm going to take this in the way that he describes it as X certification, which was then replaced with 18 certification in England. And the American equivalent is kind of murky because there's R, which is 17 and up, unless you have a parent or guardian with you. And then there is a thing that's called NC-17, which is you have to be 17 or older. You can't go in even with a parent unless, if you're younger than 17. Most things that are like either 14 or 18 certified in England. But the thing is that all of the major theater chains in the United States will not show NC-17 movies, so almost nothing ever gets rated NC-17. If something is going to get rated NC-17, it gets edited and appealed, and then they get the rating lowered to R, which is weird. So there are a lot of movies that are worse than R that get like released unrated and things like that. It's a really stupid and arbitrary system that is very frustrating. There's a very good documentary about the board that oversees this, the Motion Picture Association of America. The documentary is called "This Film Is Not Yet Rated." Very good documentary. Suggest you check it out. But anyways, all this is to say that I'm going to choose R-rated, as the sort of bar that he's setting here. And so what was the first R-rated movie I ever saw? It was Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I was 7 years old. I was at a slumber party at my best friend Jason's house, and we watched a VHS tape of this movie. It was not only the first R-rated movie I saw, first time I saw naked women was in this film. Of course, there is a very, very famous and memorable scene of a topless woman in this movie. That was one of the most sort of iconic sexy sexual scenes in any movie of the 80s. And I do, sort of maybe have a heavy nostalgia for Fast Times just because of that association that it has with me. It is a pretty good movie, though. I'm not going to try and rally against it or anything, or act like it's not, classic. Yeah, it's a classic film, I think. But yeah, I think the first NC-17 movie I ever saw was probably Evil Dead, which has been released unrated, but then has also been rated and was rated NC-17, I'm pretty sure. And I saw Evil Dead for the first time when I was 12. And that was a big turning point for me. That was the movie that got me into horror. Like, seriously. I had been into horror. I was reading Stephen King at the time. But that one, seeing Evil Dead, it unlocked part of my brain or something. It was a landmark moment for me in my history of art. What was the first book you read which you would consider unsuitable for children? I was just mentioning this. So, when I was in 5th grade, I started reading adult books, basically. My parents are big thrifters, so I would be at thrift stores a lot looking at books, and when I was in 5th grade, I started buying adult books and reading them. And so I was reading, the stuff that was, like, the most popular fiction, uh, you know. So that's stuff like John Grisham, James Patterson, and Stephen King, and Anne Rice, and, other things like that. Um, but there's this very famous story that my life history my mom tells often, where I did a book report on Carrie, and my 5th grade teacher wrote in red ink on the book report and had me bring home, and she wrote, "This is not 5th grade friendly reading material." And my mom brought it back with her when she went in for parent teacher conferences, and, like, got uppity with my teacher and was like, "You do not, like, tell my son not to read," right? Like, he's smart, he's reading well outside of his reading level for his age. You should be encouraging that. You shouldn't be trying to get him to stop reading. I think my mom is right on there. I think that maybe the thing I would say to both of them is that, like, I think that both of them have valid points, but I think that what neither of them actually did was talk to me about what I was reading. You know? Like, I think that voicing the concern that, like, Stephen King books contain content that a 10-year-old isn't necessarily emotionally ready for is very fair. Um, but I think that, like, if kids are interested in those things, it's important that you talk about them and talk about why they're problematic, or, talk about how those kids feel about those subjects. Because when I look back and I think about later that same year, 5th grade, I read It, and that book has the famous child sex orgy, whatever you want to call it, sex ritual, involving the children, in the climax of the book. And I didn't really think about that at the time, but then I got a little bit older and I was like, that was weird. That was a weird thing. That, because I was 10, and the kids in the book are 10, so when I'm reading that, I'm like, hell yeah, this is awesome. I want to do that. Is that the best way to feel about that? I don't think so. Probably should have had an adult in my life who was talking to me about things like that. X is for X-Men. Do you have a favorite character from X-Men? My favorite X-Man is Gambit. I think he has the most interesting power. Let me just, because I don't want to get this wrong and have a nerd be mad at me. So let me look up the specific what Gambit does. Because it's, in my mind, the way I conceptualize it is that he can control kinetic energy. Okay, yeah, so I'm not wrong. Gambit has this is Wikipedia, so don't necessarily call us definitive. Gambit has the ability to mentally create, control, and manipulate pure kinetic energy to his desire. So, yeah. He is skilled in card throwing, hand-to-hand combat, and the use of the bow staff. And famously, he will use the playing cards and charge them with kinetic energy to throw them and turn them into exploding projectiles. Such a cool power. Awesome power. I love that power, and I love powers like that in superhero stories because they're not obvious. Most of the really popular superheroes, their powers are kind of obvious, right? Like Wolverine, healing. The skeleton thing is cool. I do like Wolverine. But X-Men, I think, thrives because it has a lot of really interesting powers. When you think about, like, the Avengers, it's like Captain America, he's strong, and the Hulk, he is big, and he is also strong. And Thor, well, Thor, he's strong. You know? Not as interesting to me. X-Men, I think, is really cool because it's about all of these people with really unique powers and how they can get them to interact with each other, which is like a fun puzzle I like. Also, the themes of X-Men has always appealed to me more because it's about, coming of age and puberty and body changing and things. It's also often used as a sort of political allegory for, discrimination of all kinds, racial, sexual, sexuality, etc. Which I think is really good and powerful. It works as a good metaphor. So I like the X-Men a lot. I used to be fairly into comic books when I was younger. The MCU has almost completely killed all of my love for superheroes. I really feel like Alan Moore, at this point, in my disdain for superheroes. But I do like X-Men. And the X-Men movies have been pretty good, Only recently have they had ones that are, like, real bad. And Logan is maybe my favorite Marvel movie ever. Up there with Punisher Warzone and Howard the Duck, for sure. X is for xylopyrography, the art of burning an image onto wood. So I didn't look any up, but this is obviously, a wood burning is a thing. It's very cool. It made me think of toast image, which has become like a pretty common thing. But I remember the first time I ever saw it, there was this exhibit at the Walker Art Center here in Minneapolis, which is the big modern art gallery, big gallery, very famous gallery. And they did this event where anybody could submit a piece that was, I think it was probably like 6 by 6 inches or smaller. And everything that got submitted was displayed. And it was like these rooms that were like 15 foot high, just grids of thousands of small pieces. And then there was like a computer. This was pre-smartphones, so there was like a computer terminal where you could like look up by like row and column what each piece was, and there was a little artist statement or whatever for everything there. And I remember there were only two, technically four pieces in the whole thing that I remember. One was 3 different buttons, physical buttons, that said yes, no, and maybe, that were in different spaces around the thing, and at the end of the show, they tallied up how many times each one got pressed, and that was interesting. The other one I remember was a framed piece of toast with the face of the Dalai Lama toasted into it. X is for xenophobia. Have you been shocked by xenophobia that you have encountered in your reading? Shocked is probably not the right word that I would use. I think that I've been walking in left-wing circles my whole life, and I've been walking in like far left circles for most of my life. I started getting into far left politics and socialism and communism and things like that when I was about 14. And so I'm not surprised by xenophobia and racism. Is disappointing, certainly. But when I'm reading something old, particularly, I know it's coming, right? I'm ready for Shylock to come into the story, or whatever other caricature of whatever race or ethnicity is gonna make it rear its ugly head. Um, so I wouldn't say I'm shocked by it. I think that one thing that I think is really great there's this scene in American Psycho. I can't remember if it's in the book, but it's in the movie. That is so funny and prescient, and it's when he's at dinner with a bunch of his friends, right, his coworkers, and one of them is like making Jew jokes basically, and Patrick Bateman very calmly and collectedly tells him, "You gotta cool it with the anti-Semitic remarks." And it's such a great like example of how like the term virtue signaling is like a new idea, right? People have just recently started to use that phrase. But the idea of like putting forth this sort of like progressive and woke, politically correct facade in public is not a new concept, and the idea of like that Patrick Bateman is saying and doing these things, being woke because he wants people to, he wants to fit in and not stand out. But then at the same time, it's not like he cares about the plight of the Jewish people. He's a sadistic serial killer rapist who's like one of the most reprehensible fictional characters ever created. There's something very telling about that, it's really interesting. Finally, X is for X Factor. I'm going to skip the bonus prompts because I have to leave in a few minutes. Do you have a hidden talent? It's not very hidden, but I do play the guitar, amongst other things, on this channel. Maybe my hidden talent is that I can play the saw, singing saw, which is pretty cool.